What's up, guys? Ben Brewster here, True Athletics. We're going to be breaking down Pedro Martinez mechanics here. This won't be a full-length, in-depth breakdown. Going to try to make these a little bit shorter because there are so many commonalities between high-level throwers. I want to kind of pick apart the pieces and the bits that kind of make a guy unique or special, and kind of hone in and focus on those without getting too repetitive. So, big picture, what kind of sets Pedro Martinez apart? He's obviously one of my favorite pitchers of all time, as with a lot of guys. A lot of people look up to him as potentially the best pitcher of all time. I think it comes down to three things. One, pitchability. He's a guy who's always had exceptional command paired with exceptional stuff. So really 3+ pitches in his prime. And then obviously, efficient mechanics. Mechanically, I think what we're going to primarily be able to focus in on here is lower half. So he does an exceptional job creating tension and producing velo from his lower half. He's a smaller guy, smaller frame, slender build, still throwing into the upper 90s through the first half of his career. And then also, along with that, an electric arm itself. So elite mobility, long fingers, relatively long levers, very whippy, very fast twitch as well. So an efficient lower half and then just a fast whippy arm. So let's go ahead and dive in and kind of break down what I'm seeing start to finish here. So we go to the side view. Right here, you'll see he's already coming set a little bit wider than shoulder width. And so where is his actual weight distribution here? When we talk about this concept of the drift, one way that a lot of pitchers will do that, and he certainly falls into this category, is coming set a little bit wider and having that weight distribution biased more towards the front foot. Now, so he looks to be about 60-40 as far as percentage of his body weight on that front foot. So what happens is a lot of guys will start where all their weight is already balanced and focused over the back leg, and so it's more difficult to get that initial weight shift, that initial forward move, when you have more of an even or even back leg biased weight distribution. So you can see he's coming set a little bit wide, weight towards the front foot, and then if you watch his head, it really doesn't shift back that far, maybe a couple inches, but he keeps his weight. His weight is already out front, and then as he lifts his leg, he keeps his weight out front, and so that's what's creating this kind of drift-like phenomenon. So he lifts the leg, peak leg lift right about here. And again, you can see his center of mass out front of the back leg. The other important piece to note here is that he's hooking the rubber. It's a little bit difficult to tell. Here's a picture where you can really kind of see the angle he's creating off the back foot, but you can again see that half his foot is up on the rubber, half is kind of down on the dirt. And so we'll talk about that more in a second. But that is what he considered one of his big keys. So he's got this weight distribution and this initial drift paired with the fact that he's hooking the rubber, so he's able to create that more kind of lateral force back into the ground, back into the mound. So when we talk about his hooking the rubber, this is something that I've heard him mention before. I just finished actually reading his biography, and he kind of went over where he got this teach, or where he began doing this. And it's actually from Sandy Koufax. Sandy Koufax, known for hooking the rubber, kind of popularizing that idea. So he would, later on in his coaching years, teach players that he worked with to hook the rubber. And so Pedro actually said in his book that Sandy Koufax was there to talk about hooking the rubber. Sandy told us that if you, quote, only put the side of your foot against the rubber, your back foot slides on the ground as you push off it. However, if you use the rubber as an anchor by hooking it with your cleat, you stay level and as tall as possible from the mound. So we'll talk about that more in a future video as far as who should hook the rubber and under what circumstances, but there certainly is a time and a place where certain pitchers will absolutely throw harder and be able to create more tension in the backside, in that rear leg specifically, by hooking the rubber. And so certainly for Pedro, that was a consideration. It did help him. He did gain velo, and he actually talked about later in the book how he, when he did actually play with Curt Schilling, when Curt Schilling came to the Red Sox, he taught him how to hook the rubber, and Schilling immediately began throwing 2-3 miles an hour harder, according to Pedro, and that actually corresponded to some ankle problems with Schilling, and ultimately leading to that bloody sock incident in the playoffs. So it's definitely not something that everyone can pull off, and certainly depends to some extent on how mobile your ankles and hips are. Now Pedro's a guy who has good mobility. He's got great hip internal rotation. Just as you can see from the amount of coil, the positions he's able to get into, he's got quite a bit of range of motion in that back hip. And so this image to me really shows him creating this, quote unquote internal tension throughout his entire body. So you can see again this back leg, back foot turned inwards, hooking the rubber. He's creating more of this positive shin angle as opposed to that kind of vertical shin angle like some pitchers will have to do. Holding a coil on the front hip as well, and then you can see that glove arm kind of mirroring that as well. So he's in pronation and internal rotation on that glove arm. So his entire body at this point is creating this very internal, he's creating a ton of internal tension at this point, coming out of that drift and coming out of that leg lift position. Now here's an interesting image, or interesting video rather, of Pedro teaching that forward move. So I know it's kind of tough to see from this video. It's the best one I could find. So there's a couple things to notice here, because again, this is not exactly how he throws in a game situation, but it gives us information as to what he's thinking, how he was trying to load his hips. And so you can see he's kind of finding a little bit of a hinge position, a little bit of knee bend, a little bit of hip flexion, loading himself, staying stacked. And then as he moves forward and he's showing this is his move. And so you can see that he's not extending the back leg. He's finding that hinge and then he's moving through his pelvis while keeping his pelvis closed. So that move right there is how he kind of teaches other guys to move forward. And if we again go back to how he's actually moving forward from this side view right here. Drift, keeps the weight out front, hooks the rubber. Now he drops aggressively into the backside. He's got this internal tension, this coil over the back leg. He's created a ton of wind and tension all through this entire backside. And then as we move forward, watch how he's moving. So it's not an extension movement off the back leg. It's a riding of the center. It's a staying sideways, moving through the middle, riding the slide. There's a bunch of ways to think about it, but this is a key move right here. It's not jumping off the rubber. It's not aggressively, triple extending off the rubber. It's creating that angle, creating tension, and then moving through the center of the body while staying closed. It's that position right there. That's his key to how he's able to throw so hard. As far as which pitchers can kind of get away with hooking the rubber, again, we talked about this is really creating tension in the backside so that the pelvis has something stable to not just to move forward linearly down the mound against. So if you can't create stability through this back leg, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have something stable for the pelvis to move forward, but you're also not going to have anything stable for the pelvis to unload against, to be able to create any sort of real rotational unload. And so pitchers that have inherently more range of motion, more slack in this back hip, think about like a seated hip internal rotation test. You're sitting on a box and your feet are hanging off the box and you rotate that foot out as far as you can. Pitchers who have a lot of hip internal rotation, have more slack, they're going to typically do better hooking the rubber and with this more positive rear shin angle. And then again, pitchers with very limited hip internal rotation, they can't get here. They don't have this range of motion through hip internal. And so for them, even as they try to sit in and load and coil into their backside, that's going to ultimately end up being less of a positive shin angle, more of that vertical shin. And so it's just going to look a little bit different depending on who exactly is trying to replicate this move. And that's one of those things where I would be willing to bet Schilling potentially didn't have this amount of range of motion. So he wasn't able to create this angle off of the actual, from the hip itself. He was probably creating more of that range of motion at the ankle joint. And again, was likely getting some sort of jamming up in his ankle, leading to all the issues he suffered as a result of trying to hook the rubber. So it's definitely not for everybody. But at the same time, if you've never tried that, you could be missing out potentially as well. So the next piece I want to point your attention to is how he rotates down into landing. This is a cue we've used for a long time with our guys, especially if they have a tendency to really pull off glove side and get overly rotational. So really kind of rotating into landing more east to west, and the pelvis pulls them way open. And this will typically be the guy where at ball release, the head is way off to the side, way out over here, kind of arm way left behind and lagging. So we'll use this cue of rotating down into landing as a way to actually keep that pelvic unload. Yes, the hips have to get open, but how do they get open is the question. And the concept of rotating down into landing keeps everything online, keeps that direction as the hips do ultimately open up versus just spinning way off towards the side. And so you can actually see this really well in this side view right here. Again, you can see where that glove side glove side pelvis is. This would be his anatomically, this would be his ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine. You see this again, top left part of his pelvis, and you watch the track that takes. So from here to there. So you can really see from this frame to this frame, the pelvis is not just spinning open where the belt buckle is spinning out and around over towards first base. The pelvis is like this bowl that's dumping forward. It's rotating open, yes. The belt buckle is ending up facing the catcher, but how does it get there? And that's what we're always talking about with rotating down into landing. And that matters for a couple reasons. When we look at how the front leg works, if you can rotate down into landing, landing from above is another way of thinking about it, but rotating down into landing, the lead leg ends up working better. The resulting block that you get from this lead leg is a more stable block. When you spin way off to the side, what usually happens, what you'll see is this knee ends up bowing out to the side and this front foot starts to peel off the ground, and it becomes much more difficult to stick that landing. When you rotate down into landing like this, you get this kind of reflexive blocking action of the lead leg. So this is just a great visual of him literally rotating down into landing, and you can see the direction that the pelvis actually takes. And so that's one reason that his lead leg works as well as it does, is the direction that he's able to create all this tension and then unload it down into landing. That allows the lead leg to actually work more effectively and get more of the energy up the chain. And again, he's not a big guy. Throwing 97 at whatever he is, 5'10", 5'11", 185 pounds, somewhere in that range. A smaller guy, like he's moving very, very efficiently. And if he were a 6'3", 6'4" guy, 230 pounds, these are the type of patterns that would elicit 99, 100 plus miles an hour, in my opinion. And then one additional thing to look at, again, this particular clip, these two clips, I don't know exactly which year they were from. My guess is this is from after 2000. He did have, I believe, some shoulder issues somewhere in the early 2000s, 1999, 2000. Obviously, he was very, very dominant, but had some shoulder issues around that time, a little bit later. And what I've noticed, at least in these clips, less so in earlier clips, but his elbow does have a tendency to actually get relatively low. So you can see if we look on the left here, how high does the elbow actually track before he starts to flip up? And again, you can see just how low the elbow is relative to the line of the shoulders. So his elbow is a little bit low. We can really see that here as well, right? It kind of scoops down and up, under here as he begins to rotate the trunk. So ideally, you'd like to see the elbow not above the line of the shoulders, but just in line with the shoulders. So his elbow is actually out of plane here. It's kind of dragging just a little bit. Again, he gets it right back in plane a couple frames later. It's not the best video ever, but I almost wonder. And this does appear to get worse and worse over kind of the later years of his career. If you look at some of his Phillies footage, you look at some of his Mets footage. So I do wonder about the specifics of his shoulder injury. I'm not quite aware, but maybe there was some impingement stuff going on, some supraspinatus, infraspinatus stuff going on. I'm not entirely sure, to where he wasn't able to actually get the elbow up those last couple inches, get that flip up in plane, and again, kind of dragging the arm just a little bit. And so that is just a consideration. His velo was down, 3-4 miles an hour towards the very later part of his career, even a little bit more later on. So I wonder if this is kind of when that potentially first started in this clip. But aside from that, still very, very explosive. Even though he's a little bit out of plane, you can see just how much aggression he's finishing with. And again, we don't have measurements on every part of his body, but it does appear that he's got pretty long arms at this point. So another consideration too. We've coached a number of pitchers who are kind of on the shorter end, 5'9", 5'10", 5'11", but you measure their wingspan, the hard throwing ones, and a lot of them actually end up having 6 foot, 6'1", 6'3", 6'4" wingspans, with shorter frames. And so, I almost wonder if maybe he's a guy who, despite being 5'10", 5'11", from what I can recall, he's may have a longer wingspan than that, which again could be a contributing factor to why he was able to throw as hard as he was. I certainly know that he's got very long fingers. He's very, very flexible, and that is thought to be a contributor to why his changeup was as good as it was, why he was able to get that last little bit of life on his fastball, and there certainly could be some truth to that. But again, I'm going to end it there. Covered a lot of stuff. I do think that kind of that initial weight shift, the hooking the rubber, the creating tension in the backside, rotating down into landing, and then ultimately having good whippy arm action are kind of the keys to his success. And then obviously he's always had that pitch ability, and really had developed an elite feel for the changeup and for the curveball by late 90s, early 2000s. Certainly one of my favorite pitchers to watch of all time. I definitely go back to that All-Star Game appearance, at least once a year to watch through that. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this, got something out of it. Let me know down below who your favorite pitcher of all time is. If it was Pedro, would love to hear that. If you have any questions about this breakdown, I would love to hear from you guys as well. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.